I've got some ideas for talking about consent with young people for you. The first tool that we've got is, of course, making sure young people understand the laws. And now there's two kinds of law to think about. There's the ages of consent, and then there's the conditions for consent. When we talk about the ages of consent, it's really important that young people, and I would start this by age 12, is that they understand that no one can have sex with a person under the age of 12. The other thing that we want to make sure young people know is that the emphasis for the law has changed in a lot of jurisdictions, so that a person has to demonstrate that they asked for consent rather than just sort of sat back and waited to hear a no. So that's awesome because it stops the focus for responsibility being on the person who, in a sense, is trying to protect themselves, and puts the onus on the person, seeking consent, that they are accountable for checking. So the other thing that we want young people to know, or at least the question that I get asked most often, is how drunk is too drunk in terms of being capable of consenting. And the law says that a reasonable person would be able to see if someone is incapable of giving consent. So that kind of means if the person that you were with was stumbling around and everyone else at the party would say that they looked pretty much off their face, then the assessment is going to be that they weren't capable of giving consent. So whilst that's not a perfect answer, it's probably as good as we're going to get. I think the other thing, this kind of highlights a problem with having a law-only focus when we talk about consent with young people, because I'm sure you've probably experienced too that kind of tendency for the conversation to almost sound like, what can I get away with, and are they going to lie? What that's doing is engendering or permitting that continued notion of sex being a combative experience, that it's not something that is mutual, and that we need to be checking in with the person that we're with to make sure they're happy and enjoying themselves too. So I've talked with you about explaining the law as one tool for thinking about consent together with young people. And finally, I would add that we need to move beyond talking about sex and consent as if it's simple. I think it's super disempowering. It's like saying to someone with depression, oh, just snap out of it. It is so unrealistic to suggest that consent is a simple act. So the first thing I think we can do is to reshape our thinking about how sex should be. So let's just add this to the consent continuum. Let's aim for happy, safe, fun sex, and ask young people, how do we get from consent, which is really the start of the conversation, to happy, safe, fun sex? And really the answer usually is by paying attention to each other, not thinking about it as something that you do to someone else. So I've used that with lots of young people, and it seems to work super well. The third and final tool that I would suggest is this one. And this is an ethical framework that was originally developed by Karen Willis and Moira Carmody from New South Wales. And then I turned it into something that might work with younger people in high schools. So what I want to draw your attention to box number 3. So what it really allows time for is to think about power in relationships. Now, power is so subtle in so many ways, and it is largely about gender norms and inequity, but it's not only about gender, is it? So the other factors that might make me more vulnerable, less supported in the community to assert my choice, might be to do with racism, homophobia, transphobia. And we do know that those communities who are more vulnerable by virtue of prejudice do experience more sexual assault. Also young people with disabilities. So we need to stop and think about how power affects my relationship with this person that I'm with at the time. We may not have solutions for that all the time, but I think taking the time to acknowledge, can I say what I want, what kind of sex I want to have, makes my lack of power more visible. And also, conversely, if I am the more powerful person in that relationship, to think about the impact of my power and whether or not that person will feel free to say what they want to me and my responsibility in that situation. And that's driving us more towards concepts of being a good person and challenging gender stereotypes. One of the activities that I really like when it comes to challenging gender stereotypes, so let's count this as tool number 4, is talking about the real man stereotype versus the good man. And so how those two kinds of expectations for young men can clash, and how the real man construct can be really damaging to a young man's mental health, but also in terms of asserting control and power and aggression within a relationship is so destructive, versus being a good man and looking out for other people and kindness. So they're my tools. You can find those on my website, www.thehumacademy.com. And I also provide workshops and webinars, so you can get in touch with me there too.